The wind howled across the barren plains, carrying with it the whispers of pain and survival. Along a dusty stretch of road in the outskirts of a forgotten town, a young girl lay motionless, crumpled like a broken doll. Her clothes were torn, her body bruised, and her spirit nearly extinguished. Around her neck hung a cardboard sign crudely scrawled with cruel words, "Useless mouth." Whoever left her there had given up on her completely. But fate had other plans. The girl's name was Eva, though no one had ever spoken it with affection. Abandoned by those who should have loved her most, Eva had grown up surrounded by indifference, shouted commands, and empty plates. She didn't speak much, not because she couldn't, but because the world had rarely listened. Her silence wasn't emptiness, it was survival. The sun was sinking behind the horizon when he came, a tall, quiet man on horseback, silhouetted against the amber sky. Locals knew him only as the Silent Rancher. He was a man of few words, preferring the company of his horses and the stillness of the land to the noisy chatter of people. They said he'd suffered great loss, his wife and daughter taken in a car crash years before. Since then, he'd spoken maybe a handful of words. Some folks believed he was broken, but others knew he simply felt more than he could say. As his horse trotted closer, he noticed the motionless form in the dust. The girl didn't flinch. He dismounted slowly, kneeling beside her with careful hands, reading the sign. A flicker of something passed through his eyes, pain, maybe rage, but mostly sorrow. Without a word, he lifted her into his arms and placed her gently across his saddle. The ride back to his ranch was silent, save for the rhythmic clopping of hoofs and the occasional gasp of breath from the fragile figure he carried. The ranch house was old, worn by time, but sturdy. He laid her on a clean cot in the room that had once belonged to his daughter, lighting a lamp and filling a bowl with warm water. Gently, he cleaned the blood and dirt from her face, treating each wound with the tenderness of a man trying to mend more than just flesh. Days passed. She didn't speak. He didn't either. Instead, they spoke in gestures, him setting down food, her slowly learning to trust that she could eat it. He placed a blanket around her shoulders when the wind grew harsh, she folded it neatly and left it by the fire in the morning. There were no demands, no interrogations. Only quiet care. Eva began to heal, her wounds scabbed over, and color returned to her cheeks. She began to follow the man as he did chores, feeding chickens, brushing horses, mending fences. She was clumsy at first, but he never criticized. He simply watched, nodded, and once even smiled. In that smile, Eva saw something she hadn't felt in years, acceptance. Months went by, and the seasons shifted. Spring arrived, painting the fields with wildflowers and scenting the air with possibility. The rancher, who everyone assumed had sealed himself off from the world, was changing too. His movements softened, his shoulders lifted. Where silence once masked grief, now it was filled with understanding. One morning, Eva stood before him holding a wooden plaque. She had carved it herself from the stump of an old tree behind the barn. On it were 2 words, "Thank you." He took it in his weathered hands, staring at the letters. Slowly, almost painfully, he nodded. "You're welcome," he said, the first words he'd spoken in years. That night, the stars shone brighter than ever. Word eventually spread through the small town that the Silent Rancher had taken in a girl, one who had been discarded like trash, labeled as a burden, left to die. Some were skeptical, others curious. A few whispered that he'd finally lost his mind, taking in a useless mouth, when he could barely keep to himself. But those who saw them together, working side by side, smiling in their silence, knew that something beautiful had happened. 2 broken souls had found each other and begun to mend. Eva never spoke much. She didn't have to. Her actions spoke louder than any words. She learned to ride, to plant, to build. She began teaching other young kids in the area how to care for animals, how to carve wood, how to be patient. She never said it aloud, but through everything she did, she proved one thing over and over again. She was not a useless mouth. One summer, a letter arrived at the ranch. It was from a social worker in the city, someone who had once tried to place Eva in a home when she was younger. The letter explained that her mother had finally been located, and that she had expressed interest in seeing Eva again. The rancher gave her the letter without a word. Eva stared at it for a long time. Then she took the sign, the one that had been tied around her neck, and walked to the fire pit. She placed it carefully into the flames, watching it curl and blacken until nothing but ash remained. Then she turned to the rancher, smiled softly, and shook her head. "This is my home," she whispered. The rancher didn't reply. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything. Years later, the ranch would become a sanctuary, not just for Eva and the rancher, but for others. Word spread about the quiet place on the plains where people who had been broken, discarded, or silenced could come to find peace and purpose. They called it Whispering Pines, and its motto was simple: no one is a useless mouth. Visitors often asked about its origin, and the story was always told the same way, of a girl left to die and a man too broken to speak, who found in each other a reason to live. It was a story of survival, of quiet love, and the power of presence. A tale that proved healing doesn't always come in words, it comes in actions, in gestures, in silent strength. And every night, when the stars blanketed the sky, Eva and the rancher would sit on the porch in silence, sipping tea, watching the horizon. In that silence lived 1,000 words. Words of pain, hope, healing, and above all, belonging. Because sometimes, the quietest stories are the ones that touch the soul the deepest.